Welcome to the Inclusion Institute. Our session's topic is titled Implementing Multi-Tiered System Support, also known as MTSS, in the Inclusive Classroom. And the specific focus is on a classroom teacher's guide. I'm Nikita Bates-Gilliam, and I'm co-presenting with.
I'm Dr. Alicia Drellick, and thank you for joining us today.
Yes. And keep in mind, as this presentation is ongoing, please feel free to add questions to the chat to drive our live question and answer. All right. So our agenda for today, we're going to start off with an overview of MTSS and then flow into planning for tiered supports. Then talk about the assessment and MTSS, leveraging MTSS to support students with disabilities, and end with our live Q&A.
So we're going to begin with an overview of multi-tiered support systems. Oftentimes this is confused with response to intervention, but when we're talking about multi-tiered support systems, we're really talking about supporting the whole child as well as the entire school community. So when we think of multi-tiered supports, we're thinking not just academics, but also behavioral supports and community and family engagement. The ultimate goal is to create a positive school culture and climate that engages effective learning. Throughout the presentation, we'll talk about the various tiers of support and how you in your classroom can implement a multi-tiered system. We'll first begin with addressing some very common misconceptions about multi-tiered support systems. First, we want to make sure that this is not something that leads to labeling students. So when we talk about tiered supports, we are not talking about designations or placements. We are specifically talking about the level and intensity of supports that are received by students. For example, we would not call a student a tier 2 student if they are receiving tier 2 interventions. They are simply students who are receiving those interventions. So we want to be mindful about this not leading to labeling. Multi-tiered supports are a system that's put in place that should be dismantling labels. So again, we're providing students with support without the need for labels. Further, we also want to look at multi-tiered support systems as a means of supporting all students, including students who receive individualized education programs. So thinking through this, we can use the multi-tiered support systems as a way of providing students who are labeled with a disability and receive services through an IEP or 504 plan with high quality support in inclusive settings.
Now, we need to keep in mind when we're thinking of multi-tiered support systems as the teacher being the cornerstone of it all. So when we consider this, we're looking firstly at who's going to be delivering this core instruction. That's the teacher. They're going to be delivering the majority of the instruction that the student receives. They're also going to be in charge of doing the progress monitoring, taking copious notes, collecting data on said student. Then they're going to be implementing the intervention, so providing the student with specific skills that are needed for progression. Then the teacher is going to be responsible for the positive behavior supports that the student receives, what is in place, what is set in stone, or a fluid process for that student. Then the teacher will be in charge of assessing student growth. So again, monitoring and reviewing data, and then keeping in mind, considering what are these next steps for the student. And then finally, the teacher is going to be responsible for collaborating with colleagues, because this is an ongoing process. So involving all the stakeholders who are taking a seat at the table to assess and support the students and looking at the next steps for the students.
So when we think about multi-tiered support systems, we will be looking through tiered supports. This graphic gives you an idea of how we increase support and what percentage of students might be receiving certain types of support. Generally, when we're talking about tier 1 support, we're looking at how we can support up to 80 to 90% of our students through high quality instruction, universal design, and differentiated instruction. From there, About 5 to 10% of students may need some small group and targeted interventions in order to help them master skills and demonstrate their knowledge. Then moving up to our tier 3 supports, generally this is 1 to 5% of students who may need individualized or more intensive interventions in order to meet a certain standard or master skills. When we're thinking about tier 1 instruction, again, this is really our general instruction that's happening in our classrooms. So first and foremost, when we're looking through an academic lens, we want to make sure that we are using evidence-based curriculums that embed both explicit and direct instruction. When we're developing lessons and learning experiences, we would be using universal design principles in order to ensure that things are accessible and engaging. Further within our academic instruction, we want to apply differentiated instruction as needed during the learning process. When we're looking at supporting behavior, we want to ensure that we are explicitly teaching classroom expectations, embedding social and emotional learning opportunities, and use positive reinforcement to encourage desired behavior. For tier 1 strategies for teachers, again, we want to first make sure that we are using explicit instruction and teaching our core curriculum with fidelity. And oftentimes this is easier said than done. You want to make sure that you are abiding by the scope and sequence of your curriculum and teaching using the methods that are outlined in your curriculum and teacher's guide. Within planning, we can apply universal design for learning in order to make sure that things are accessible to students as well as engaging. So in the chat, we will drop the link to the CAST website that will provide the Universal Design for Learning framework so that you can consult that as needed. After you are following your curriculum and you have planned and developed to increase universal access, we want to apply differentiated instruction as a means of responding to student learning. So again, we've done our best to plan and teach with fidelity, and then we can respond by modifying the content, process, or product in order to meet student learning needs. All of this is happening in our core curriculum in our inclusive classroom, and all students are engaged in learning in this tier.
Okay, now we're going to explore what tier 2 looks like, and by starting off with the steps for academic intervention. So looking at that, we need to realize and recognize the students who need support to meet the goal that's in place for them. And with this level of intervention, specificity is very crucial. Secondly, we need to identify which standards and/or skills actually need the intervention. Where do the students need that specific support? Thirdly, we're going to look into reviewing and analyzing the standards to identify the essential components in which the students need that support that we're exploring more. And now we're going to reiterate the need for specificity. So in the 4th step here, we need to have further analyzation of the component in which we're thinking about the learning targets in mind. We're considering the skills that the students really need to hone in on. So as this educator, how are you going to be supporting the student? Now, continuing with the steps for academic intervention, step 5 suggests that students are going to be grouped, and they're going to be grouped upon their equivalent needs, so that as a teacher, you're able to support them in best way possible. And then looking at step 6, we're going to assess and monitor progress. So you can do that via formative assessment, using those constant check-ins, which are definitely going to provide valuable feedback for you and for the students in regards to their progress. And then you can also use curriculum-based measurements, for example, running records or something that correlates with rubric scored examples. Looking at step 7, if a student needs additional support, you're going to keep in mind the process of utilizing problem solving and making adjustments as necessary to support the learner. And then looking at step 8, the teacher is definitely going to have to do problem-solving intervention and working with the team to support the student. So for tier 2, we're looking at some instructions and supports. When we're thinking of academics, we're thinking of this, perhaps this mathematical equation of targeted time plus instruction is going to equal learning. So keeping that in mind and what that visually is going to look like for your student to give them the best support needed. So making sure that the instruction is targeted, it's focused, it's explicit for the students, and that you're allowing time for improvement. You're allowing time to say, okay, let me review this progress monitoring notes and let me see where I can make some more interventions occur or what can happen. And then when you're looking at behavior, you're going to consider providing students who need additional support. So using what you used in tier 1 in conjunction with tier 2 supports. And then again, progress monitoring here occurs bi-weekly when we're considering behavior interventions. Okay, so now we're looking at tier 3. So we definitely need to intensify the academic intervention. So usually the tier 3 interventions are a continuation of the interventions, strategies, supports, and programs, but with more intensity of the process in the terms of the following things. So duration, firstly. So you're going to increase the time for exposure with your students and a chance to receive that intervention in particular. And then looking at frequency, that's going to follow how consistently the intervention occurs. Is it repeated over a period of time? For example, is it happening every week for 20 minutes? What does it look like intentionally? And then we're moving to step 3, which is individualization for the students and for the learners, and making those specific adaptations that are unique to the individual student. So for example, are you going to be focused on the student identifying the uppercase letter P in a certain way? Moving into step 4, we're going to be looking at small group focused learning, and this has to be done by a highly qualified teacher. We have to definitely emphasize that because that is key and essential for this process, especially since we're in tier 3. So this highly qualified teacher is experienced in this particular realm of instruction. And then looking at 5, the revision focus or the refocus of intervention. So always considering the question as the interventionalist, how else can we support the student? How else can we support the learner? And then looking at step 6, review progress monitoring. So how can you adjust the progress monitoring guide to meet the best needs of the learner? Okay, so looking at it in specifics of academics, we need to have amplification on the things that we just addressed: duration, frequency, revision of and focus of intervention, etc. And then looking at the diagnostics of it all. So establishing those specific lessons that are going to be allowing for ongoing of the analysis of the students' learning, of the students' learning goals that are being met, and the targeted areas for DI and those skills that will be utilized. Then when we're looking now at behavior, we have to remember to do frequent check-ins and check-out procedures with the students when they're definitely focused on the behavior process of this. And then making sure an FBA is in place and integrating that into with academics and behavior, and including prevention and consequence, thinking about what the consequence components would be for this learner.
So now that you've received an overview of the tiered supports, let's talk about how we know which students require what type of support. We do this through assessment. And on this slide, we have featured some of the key assessments that are within each tier. Starting down at the bottom, we have tier 1, and we're looking at things like universal screening. So all students receiving some type of benchmark so that we know where our students stand multiple times through the year. Additionally, we can use other measures such as state testing or our curriculum assessments to help us determine student needs. Moving up in our supports in Tier 2, we begin strategic progress monitoring that is directly related to the skills that need support. In Tier 3, we move up to more intensive progress monitoring, where we're collecting data more often so we can see if our intervention is making an impact a little bit quicker than we do in Tier 2. And then finally, in Tier 3, we might also consider diagnostic assessment to further identify learning needs. Diving a bit deeper into Tier 1 assessments, one thing to keep in mind is that as students move through tiers, we want to look for a minimum of 5 to 6 points of data that help us make this transition into addressing student needs. So some of the information that we can gather in Tier 1 can help us move forward. We want to make sure that when we are implementing assessments in Tier 1, that our expectations are clear and we're targeting specific skills that are taught throughout our curriculum. To increase student success, we want to make sure that we are providing strong models and examples, as well as featuring some mistakes that are commonly made and how students can avoid or make improvements on those. Our feedback in Tier 1 is crucial to increase mastery. So providing descriptive, specific, and meaningful feedback can help guide students throughout the learning process. Throughout this, students should also be setting personal goals and self-reflecting on their own learning goals. And ultimately, we want to focus on the idea of growth and mastery. So this can be incorporating the use of revisions in your classroom. Moving into Tier 2, so after we have collected our data in Tier 1, and we realize that a student has a specific need related to a specific content area, skill, topic, or if we're looking on behavior, a specific element of your daily routine or identifying expected behaviors. We want to begin to progress monitor that specific skill. So this could be through a curriculum-based measure or a behavior protocol. We want to make sure that, again, this is linked directly to what we want to see progress in. In addition to this form of individualized data collection, we also want to have some strong formative assessments that we're using in our instruction to make sure that students are engaging and getting student feedback on the intervention. So formative assessments not only include observations, but also asking students about their engagement and growth. Moving into our third tier, we see that the progress monitoring increases in frequency. This means that our data collection for academics are happening at least weekly. Some of our other behavior-based interventions may be happening even more frequently than weekly. So through this, we are again using some targeted protocols. So these are either curriculum-based measures directly related to skills or specifically targeted behavior observation protocols. At this point, we may want to consider diagnostic assessment by consulting with some of our colleagues who may help us problem solve and think through the assessment process. Again, we want to continue to utilize formative assessment that can drive our instruction and help us effectively meet student needs. Throughout our instruction, we want to refer to the data that we collect. And again, it's never one source of data in any of the tiers. We're always looking at multiple sources of data to help us make adjustments to respond to student needs. Remember, 5 to 6 points of data are really needed to help make an informed decision. One of the key components of multi-tiered support systems is engaging in collaborative problem solving. This happens with a multidisciplinary team. And in this, we have colleagues who are experts in supporting behavior, experts in language development, experts in the community at hand to really promote the overall academic, behavioral, and health of our student body. In these collaborative problem-solving teams, it's important to review data and work together to develop creative solutions to help eliminate student barriers to access and learning. It's important to set aside time in your schedule to meet with this team and have a process and pre-planned agenda to talk through some of the problems or challenges you're experiencing in the classroom. We come to our work with multiple perspectives and various experiences leading up to our current classroom situations, and connecting with your colleagues in order to problem solve is really key. So then we don't just have one classroom teacher thinking through a learning barrier. We have a collective group of colleagues coming from multiple disciplines who are working to help meet the student's needs. So again, this is a process that you can engage with, whether that's through your small learning communities or your professional learning groups, but focusing on problem solving and supporting students is really a key aspect of multi-tiered support systems.
Okay, so now we're going to flow into leveraging multi-tiered support systems to support students with disabilities in the inclusive classroom and what that looks like. So research has definitely proven that the benefits for students with disabilities who do receive MTSS in the inclusive setting leads to the following things. So sustained academic performance. So it's continued and it's strengthened because they, yes, are students who have an IEP, but these are students who are receiving either tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, or all 3 tiers forms of support. And going back to the beginning, remember, students are not designated or placed in a certain tier. They can receive supports along all 3 tiers if necessary, and if that's going to best fit their needs. Then they're also going to have a decrease in behavior problems because they are meeting the needs of their FBA that could be in place, or whatever that is intentionally planned by the team that's supporting them. They're also decreased in inappropriate referrals to special education, since this process of multi-tier support systems is followed and the stakeholders who are in place are being involved. It's a meaningful process and they're planning with the intentional purposes of the students in mind. And again, specificity of the students and the supports that they are needed is being met. So in essence, there is a reduction of the inappropriate referrals to special education. And another positive to this merge of special education of students who are in inclusive classrooms is the graduation rates are improved and higher due to MTSS being so implemental. And then as we look at data, so there's definitely database individualization occurring. This data is being collected and it's a stream and a constant flow of the data being collected, of progress monitoring occurring and reviewing happening. So 2 essential questions to keep in mind during this process are special educators a part of the leadership and implementation teams? And if so, how? Because we need to have these special educators who are experts in their own field to be a part of this table, to be a part of this team. And then are general and special educators able to co-plan and co-design instruction and review student assessment results? And if so, how, and how frequently is this occurring? So keeping these 2 essential questions in mind will help with the multi-tier support systems and that will be in place. Thank you so much for joining us with our session today.
We look forward to the live Q&A where we can engage in what's happening on the ground at your school and talk through some of the questions and concerns you might have about implementing multi-tiered support systems in your classroom.